Thank you. For our next talk, we have a change of speaker. Kathy McIver couldn't make it today, so we've got Cullen Cockburn from AOC, who's going to talk to us about an early medieval site at Birdie House.
Right. Thank you for welcoming me up here this morning. I have the pleasure of inheriting this talk from Kathy McIver, who recently published the excavation analysis on Birdie House. She in turn inherited the project from Kevin Patton, who led the excavation and evaluation works back in 2014 and 2016 respectively. Back when this site was commencing, I was at the very beginning of my archaeological career. By that I mean I was leaving high school. This all happened back in 2014 and 2016 respectively. That said, it's fallen to me to conclude what has been a 10-year project spanning the efforts of 2013 to 2023. What I intend to accomplish here is to walk you through the story of Birdie House, beginning in 2013 with the desk-based assessment on behalf of Barrett Holmes, who were looking to develop the fields north of Birdie House village. I wish to take you through the excavation process and the interpretation of 2023's publication, which places Birdie House as a satellite to the sweeping political and cultural changes during southern Scotland's turbulent 7th century. That sees a regional displacement from the Brittonic Gododin kingdom to the arrival of the Northumbrian Angles. Not that way. Hey. As we can all hopefully see, Birdie House is situated to the south of Edinburgh between the Morton Hall and Straighton junctions, which is a fancy way of saying it sits next to the Edinburgh City bypass. It's squished in between the Broom Hills and Birdie House Road to the east and west. Perhaps many of you travel past it today. Oh, going the wrong way. Archaeologically, the site has a lot in common with these nearby purple-marked locations, stretching from Dolphinton in the Scottish borders to eastern Kinnaird and Fife. These locations represent similar nearby sites dated to the 6th and 12th centuries, associated with the normal rural occupation and surviving to a similar degree as the remains found at Birdie House. Next slide. Oh, yeah. Contrasting our purple distribution of rural sites, it is worth considering how the high-status sites marked in green sit within the landscape. These locations represent a density of high-quality materiality from the 6th to 8th centuries, associated with the first Brittonic and then the Anglo elite, whose prominence in the region declines and grows respectively. I tell you, these pointy things. Right. Around the site, there's a number of antiquarian finds associated with the excavations. Okay, the Liberton stone cross sits just to the north. A Bronze Age scabbard was found near Kames, which was noted down by antiquarians. And a set of prehistoric crop marks can be identified to the east of the site, which, given the findings at Birdie House, might prove to be quite exciting in the future. To the south, in 2005, an Anglo-Saxon disc-headed pin was found, potentially contemporary with the site's remains. So what I want to get across to you here, right, is we've got a large yellow area that was evaluated in 2014 by Kevin Patton, and then in red, we've got the much smaller excavation area off to the west. So, prior to works, aerial photography had identified indistinct prehistoric crop marks within the boundaries of the site. It was this feature which first drew archaeological interest and attention to the field at Birdie House. Here we can see a roughly oval shape, lightly depicted against a dark crop, which roughly aligns with the boundaries of the settlement. So the site is situated on relatively high ground away from the coastal plain, and it's sheltered between two north to south sort of ridge lines, and it sits in this hollow dip, which we can kind of see. Laser pointer on here. Hey, we can kind of see this is the hollow dip here, and these are the two ridges. These run north to south, and if you know the prevailing winds in sort of like Lothian Scotland, those prevailing winds are east-westerly. So it would mean that the site area itself is sheltered, and the fact that it's down in this hollow means that soil may have been displaced from the ridges, and that might have helped preserve some of the remains. But this isn't obviously the best preserved site in the world. Oh. Right. 2014, the evaluation targeted a number of features across the site, particularly the area of crop marking. Here, a set of prehistoric linears were revealed, along with a charcoal-rich posthole. These discoveries brought AOC Archaeology back in 2016 to begin excavation on what was thought to be a complex prehistoric field system. Where are we? This area in orange here, that's the excavation area. They did a little excavation up here in Trench 9. I'm not going to talk about that in particular because the finds are not really relevant for what is the dating of the majority of the site. This way. So this is them opening up the area back in 2016 on what was a foggy morning. Conditions on the site were very cold and wet. It happened in early spring. And you may glean from some of the photos that it wasn't always a particularly pleasant weather conditions that they dealt with. Right. The excavations were successful in uncovering 6 key features, many of them linears, corresponding with the shape of the oval enclosure depicted in crop marks. More interestingly, a couple of hitherto unidentified structures appeared, such as a round kiln, a rectangular building, and a cobblestone platform. The identification of these structures marked Bardy House out as something more than just a prehistoric field system, but as a prehistoric settlement. Right. Enclosing the 6th to 8th century features is a broad oval enclosure, and this has been radiocarbon dated to the 7th and 8th century. The feature is highly truncated and ephemeral in places. As such, it might represent a ditch running alongside a hedge or a fence line, enclosing the more central elements of the settlement. I think it's all right. Yeah. To the northern end of the site, there is a set of continually reworked and recut curvilinear ditches, possibly related to drainage along a set of hedges and fences. These features were possibly utilised as a windbreak constructed for the nearby kiln to the north. However, as with all ditches uncovered on the site, they were uniformly shallow, around about 10 to 30 centimetres in depth. They were also quite truncated. It is worth then considering our interpretation here as the most plausible with what evidence we have, as it's quite possible this feature could represent something totally different had it been better preserved. The U-shaped enclosure sits to the north of the nearby rectangular building, functioning as a holding pen or agricultural space at the heart of the earlier settlement. The enclosure, and indeed all the linears found on site, had little diagnostic material, so their function and what occurred within the space they enclosed is mostly speculative and based on what other similar enclosures have been found with. The stone platform sits just outside the U-shaped enclosure and possibly relates to a work area within the agricultural settlement. Radiocarbon dating of birch fragments found beneath the structure indicate a 7th to 8th century date contemporary with the surrounding oval enclosure. On the other side of the U-shaped enclosure sits a roughly rectangular set of post holes, and an ovular pit sits to the centre of this feature, possibly being a hearth. Radiocarbon dating from 2 hazelnut fragments placed this feature to the 7th and 9th century, and the shape is indicative of small dwellings of this time. Finally, there's a kiln, and this is the latest feature on site and is perhaps the best preserved, dating to the 11th and 12th centuries. It is circular in shape with a long flue extending to the northwest. So, a programme of radiocarbon dating has added substantially to the interpretation of the site since the conclusion of excavations in 2016. Prior to radiocarbon dating, the site was not particularly different from many medieval and post-medieval settlements and field systems. However, dating has placed it in the early medieval period, adding a new site to an underrepresented period in the archaeological dataset. AOC's post-excavation department has been able to put the environmental and finds analysis into this early medieval context. As mentioned, the enclosures on site were unfortunately quite sterile and shallow, so there were only a couple of diagnostic materials recovered, and those include a lead fitting, a glass bead, and a limestone weight. Now you can see the bead and the limestone weight over there. However, these items are represented across the medieval period in Scotland and may have entered the context of the site during any time in this period. They do perhaps hint that at Birdie House, occupants had access to glass jewellery, a system of weights and measurements, and storage solutions requiring fittings for boxes and other items. But these statements are not supported by enough conclusive evidence when it comes to the quantity of the finds. These finds are also not particularly tied down to particular contexts. They're not, well, what I mean is they're not secure contexts. The stone platform consisted of one single course of stones and was found to have at least one post hole beneath it. It is possible that this feature functioned as a once much larger outdoor working area covered by a protective wooden canopy. It may relate to the functioning of the 6th to 7th century site. However, its stratigraphic height casts some doubt on this, as it may have been placed atop an earlier post hole feature that now has been quite truncated. Here we are. Consisting of 11 post holes surrounding an ovular hearth formed of angular stones, this possible dwelling structure was 5 to 2.5 metres and may have been larger with post settings lost to ploughing. The building may have accommodated the activities of daily medieval life or was associated with the agricultural places taking place on the site. Unfortunately, the area around the post hole and the hearth provides us with no materials representing daily life at Birdie House, a result of poor preservation, or possibly that the inhabitants cleared out the structure prior to abandonment. The features so far covered relate broadly to the 6th to 8th centuries and form what we think is a relatively average or low-status rural site, laying away from the higher-status coastal locations, but within supply range forming part of an interdependent network. The kiln. Now, this is one of the more interesting features. The kiln was excavated carefully in quadrants, and they did 100% sampling each stratigraphic horizon. Doing so provided substantial environmental evidence. Firstly, a fragment of hazel was found in the kiln, which was dated to the 11th and 12th centuries, certifying the kiln as a later addition to the site. The kiln was packed with inclusions of charcoal dominated by hazel and willow roundwoods, and these were intermixed with peat fragments, which probably form what was the fuel source for the kiln. Fuels like peat burn with less ferocity, so would provide more safety when using a wooden kiln setup. The circular shape of the kiln is designed to draw heat from a fire set below the kiln upwards through a permeable wooden floor. Grain on top of this floor would have been dried out by the subsequent heat driven in by air from the flue. The dangers associated with kiln work, especially using a wooden structure in a windy environment, would mean a sheltered area of land, such as one in a hollow, would be needed, as well as wind screens and a distance from dwelling places to ensure safe and controlled use. So that's the sort of round shape there. And then what picture of the flue? That's the flue up there in the top corner. Alongside the remains of fuel evidence, barley, oats, wheat and rye were also uncovered as the main crops being processed within the kiln. Barley far outstrips any other crop in recovered fragments and is one of the most economically important crops in Scotland during the Middle Ages. There is, however, no evidence of crop processing on the site, as no chaff was found within the fuels of the kiln. So potentially this is all being brought into the site for specialist kiln processing. The material finds from the kiln include some worked fragments of burnt clay, which possibly represent the fragments of a collapsed clay roof. This roof was held together by a hazel whittle frame, coated in clay bent into a dome shape in a sort of wattle and daub formation. Oh, actually, go back. Sorry, these are the finger-incised bits of fragments of burnt clay that were found in the kiln, and these sort of have human fingerprints basically imprinted into them. And that's how they know it's sort of like imprinted onto that wattle and daub frame. Okay, in 2017, AOC Archaeology went back to the site to ensure that all archaeological remains were removed properly, and since then Barratt Homes has completed their development, with the location of the site now lying under Catchall Raw Drive and Greenwell Wynd. And that is the new development over there. In 2023, the project was concluded by Cathy McIver, who published it for AOC Archaeology in this year's Archaeological Journal. The site remains of key interest, as this period is known for having limited remains that are often not earth-fast, particularly in lowland or agricultural zones. We know so little about the fall of the Gododin in the 6th and 7th centuries, relying on glimpses of text from Bede and the Irish Annals. What was life like in an ethnically diverse lowland Scotland undergoing a long Angle settlement from the 4th to 6th centuries? And how did people react when this accelerated in the 7th century in the reign of Ethelfrith of Northumbria? The archaeological record for this is limited, and the sources are conspicuously thin on the details of events concerning the ordinary Britons of lowland Scotland. Certainly, by the 8th century, these lowland Britons seem to have been incorporated into Northumbria, as in the reign of Egfrith in the late 7th century, Northumbria is confidently projecting its power further north from lowland Scotland, which would suggest that lowland Scots are quite placated or are now part of the new elite system. The low status and lack of change at Birdie House during this time perhaps indicates that it played a local low status role, perhaps a role of continuity with previous Brittonic populations shifting allegiance to a new elite. Certainly, there is source evidence from both Bede and the Life of St Wilfrid as well as others that indicate that distinct Britons persisted in the landscape of the 7th century. Perhaps Birdie House is one such location. In summary, Birdie House is a 6th to 10th century rural low-status site with later 11th to 12th century kiln activity. The site demonstrates continuity across the early medieval period, and while poor preservation may have caused a lack of remains, it is possible that it represents a non-Anglian population in southeastern Scotland. Without development-led investigation and the associated post-excavation programme, in particular the radiocarbon dating, the site is unlikely to have been targeted for research. It does, however, along with other sites resulting from developer-funded excavations and a growing lexicon of rural early medieval settlements in the Lothians, add to a growing data set. Right. I should probably thank the following people. Everyone who dealt with the publication and everyone who was on site during the excavation process way back in 2014 and 2016. I should say that this is not the Birdie House site, but I didn't really have an opportunity to use these people who'd formed the AOC symbol with their bodies, and I thought this was a great opportunity to do so. Thank you very much.